I want to tell you about a night that changed the way I think about freedom. Not freedom in the big political sense, not freedom as a concept. I mean the quiet, personal kind. The kind that lives or gets lost inside a single living creature. It was past midnight. A rescue team had made their way to the edge of a jungle, somewhere they weren't supposed to be, to find something that shouldn't have existed. And what they found, I still think about it. The team had been tipped off weeks earlier. Someone, a local, someone who couldn't stay quiet about it anymore, had told authorities about a compound, illegal, hidden, at the edge of a forest that most people never go near, and inside that compound, a gorilla. Now I want you to picture this, not as a news story, not as a statistic. I want you to actually picture it. A full-grown male gorilla, one of the most powerful, intelligent creatures on this earth, sitting on the ground, alone, in the dark, with a chain around his neck. Not a small chain, a thick, heavy, rusted chain, the kind you'd use to secure something you were genuinely afraid of losing. It had been there so long that where the metal met his skin, the skin had simply changed. Scars, old ones, permanent ones. The rescue team moved quietly. Nobody spoke, not because they'd been told not to, but because standing in front of something like that, words don't come easily. One of the team members, a woman who had done dozens of rescues before this one, said later that her hands were shaking, and she couldn't explain exactly why. They positioned the cutter. The team leader gave a small nod, one clean motion. The chain hit the ground. And then, nothing. He didn't stand. He didn't run. He didn't make a sound. He just sat there, eyes open, completely still, looking at something none of them could see. The team stepped back and waited. That's the protocol. Give space. Give time. Don't crowd. But I think even without the protocol, none of them would have moved, because there was something about that stillness that held everyone in place. 10 seconds passed. 20, 30, and then slowly, very slowly, he lifted one arm, placed it on the ground in front of him, and lay down. That was all. One of the rescuers whispered something to the person next to her. She wasn't even sure she'd said it out loud until the other person nodded. She'd said, "He doesn't know. He doesn't know the chain is gone." The next morning he was in the same spot, maybe 3 feet forward. No more. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking maybe he's injured. Maybe he's too weak to move. And yes, physically, he was in poor condition, malnourished, dehydrated. His body had been through years of neglect. But the veterinarian on the team checked him over that first morning, carefully, from a respectful distance at first, then closer, and her assessment was quiet but clear. He could move. His legs worked. His body, though weakened, was functional. He was choosing not to, or rather, he didn't know he had a choice. Think about that for a moment. He had lived so long within the limits of that chain, that specific radius, that specific ground, that even when the boundary was removed, his world stayed exactly the same size. The team watched him through that first day. They kept notes, small things, the way he flinched when a bird flew overhead, the way he'd go completely still if a leaf rustled too close, the way he kept glancing just briefly back toward where the chain had been, not trying to go back, not exactly, just checking. The way you check a door you've already locked, once, twice, just to be sure. They put food out for him, not close, about 10 feet away, and then stepped well back. He didn't approach it for almost 40 minutes, and when he finally did, he looked over his shoulder first, just once, as if asking permission. I've thought about that gesture a lot since I first heard this story, that one small look back, because I don't think it's so different from things we do ourselves, is it? How many of us have been free of something, a job that diminished us, a relationship that confined us, a habit we finally put down, and still months later find ourselves checking, still waiting for someone to tell us we're allowed? Freedom, it turns out, is not just about the chain. The days that followed were quiet ones. The team stayed. They always stay. It's not a rescue if you just remove the chain and drive away. Real rescue is slower than that. Real rescue looks a lot like just being present, day after day, without demanding anything in return. And slowly, very slowly, things began to shift. He started moving a little more each day. Not dramatically, not in the way you'd see in a film, where there's a swelling soundtrack and a sudden transformation. It was smaller than that. One morning he walked to the far edge of where he'd been staying, stopped, looked at the open ground ahead of him, then turned around and came back. The next day he went a little further, stopped again, came back. He started eating more readily. He spent longer periods just sitting quietly, watching the trees, not nervously, but with something that looked gradually more like curiosity than fear. He flinched less. That sounds like a small thing, but the team said it was one of the most meaningful changes to witness. The flinching, that constant exhausting readiness for something bad to happen, slowly, day by day, becoming less. One evening, something moved in the brush nearby. An animal, something small, nothing dangerous, but it made noise. He dropped into a crouch immediately, every muscle tight, eyes scanning, old instinct, years of it. But then he didn't stay crouched. After a few seconds he straightened up, slowly, looked in the direction of the noise for a moment longer, and then let it go. Just like that, one of the rescuers wrote in her notes that night. He's starting to remember that not everything is a threat. And then one morning they arrived at the observation point, settled in, looked toward where he always was, and he wasn't there. Nobody panicked, not outwardly, but there was a tension in the group that morning that everyone felt and nobody named, because they all knew he was weak. The forest was large, and he had never, in all the time they'd watched him, gone further than a short walk from where that chain had been. They spread out, quietly, moving through the brush, calling his name softly. It took about 20 minutes. They found him at the edge of the tree line, sitting beneath a large tree, very still, facing the forest. And the first thing everyone felt was relief. But then one of the senior rescuers, a man who had been doing this work for over 20 years, did something that nobody else had thought to do. He walked back to where the chain had been, slowly, counting his steps. Then he turned and looked at where the gorilla was sitting. He stood there for a long moment without speaking. The distance was almost exactly the length of the chain. He had moved. He had been brave enough to leave the spot he'd known for years and come to this new place. That was real. That was genuine progress. But the boundary, the invisible one, the one that lived inside him now rather than around his neck, that boundary had come with him. I don't know about you, but when I first heard that detail, it hit me somewhere deep, because most of us have never worn a chain, but I wonder how many of us are living inside the length of one, moving around within a radius that was set for us long ago, by something or someone that no longer has any hold on us, but whose limits we still quietly honor. The team sat with him through that afternoon. No agenda, no plan, just company. And as the light began to change, that golden late afternoon light that falls differently in the jungle than anywhere else, something came through the trees. Sound, low, resonant, unmistakable. Gorilla calls, wild ones, from somewhere deep in the forest, not close but clear. A group of them, going about their evening, making the sounds their kind has made for thousands of years. He went absolutely still, and then he raised his head, not toward the team, not toward the compound behind him, forward. For the first time since they'd found him, he was looking at something ahead of him rather than behind. He stood up, slowly, fully, with a steadiness that nobody on the team had seen from him before, like something that had been held at a slight angle for years had finally quietly come level. One of the rescuers said later that she turned away at that moment, not because it was painful, but because it felt private, like witnessing something that belonged entirely to him. The next morning the team arrived before sunrise. They set up in their usual spot, waited for the light. He was there, sitting at the tree line, same as the evening before, as if he'd spent the night at the edge of a decision. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved unnecessarily. And then, when the light was full, he turned toward the forest. One step. He paused, not from fear, at least it didn't look like fear. It looked like the pause of someone who has waited a long time for a moment, and now that it's here, wants to be fully present in it. Another step, and then another, and then he simply walked. No hurry, no scrambling, no looking around frantically, just a steady, quiet, unhurried walk, each step a little more certain than the one before, as if the ground beneath him was confirming something with every footfall. Yes, this is yours. Keep going. The trees received him gradually. First his back half was in shadow, then his shoulders, then all of him, just gone, into the green, into the life that had always been waiting for him on the other side of that chain. He never looked back. The team stood in the clearing, some of them for quite a while. One woman said that she'd expected to feel triumphant. That's what you prepare yourself for in this work. The win, the release, the happy ending. But what she actually felt was quieter than triumph. She felt the way you feel, she said, when something that has been wrong for a very long time is finally, simply, right. Not exciting, not loud, just right. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over, and what stays with me, more than the rescue, more than the moment he walked into the trees, is that week in between, those quiet days when he was technically free but didn't quite know it yet, when the chain was gone but the radius remained, when he was standing at the edge of something enormous and beautiful and looking back over his shoulder first. Because I think most of us know something about that, don't we? We know what it is to carry a limit that no longer exists, to move carefully within a space that was defined for us long ago, to check, just once, Just briefly, before we allow ourselves to go further. It took him 3 days to walk 50 feet, and I think that's worth honoring, not rushing past, not skipping to the part where he disappears into the trees, because those 3 days, the hesitation, the flinching, the slow and uncertain steps, those weren't failure. That was him learning for the first time in years that his steps were his own, and when he was ready, he walked a great deal further. The chain had been gone for days, but freedom, real freedom, that took a little longer to arrive. Take care of yourselves.